The meeting could have gone better. To Jean's credit, she took it like a champ. It probably helped that she was in the middle of several high-ranking Garou. Those folks, they've seen hell and worse, spit in its face, and lived to tell the tale. They speak with an intimidating air of authority only experience can bestow. So in the presence of two of them, who noticeably hate each other, with a passion born of prejudice dating all the way back to fucking prehistory, few are dumb enough to attract attention. I'm talking about Dreadhorn and Stormclaw. Dreadhorn, Ethro, that's rank 4 if you remember, I've already introduced. She was the sept leader, a Garou born with not just one, but 2 deformities. She's been the poster child of a Garou touched by the worm her entire life. For any Garou, surviving long enough to reach the respectable rank of Elder is damned impressive. For one such as her, it's almost unheard of, and a testament to her strength and ability. To understand their rivalry, we need to go back about 10 years prior to Jane's first change. The Sept had sanctioned a raid on a Bane nest that turned out catastrophic. Most of the pack scent never made it back, and those that did were followed. It was kind of like kicking a hornet's nest and bringing the whole damn hive back inside your house, then locking yourself in with them. It was before my time here, but we lost a lot of good folks that evening. The night of the Bane storm, they called it. They were eventually thwarted, following which Sarah and a few spiritually inclined Garou immediately charged back to the nest to cleanse them. Like the pro she was becoming, she got rid of all that negative feng shui which had attracted the creatures to begin with. All that while dealing with grief and new responsibilities. You see, at the time, she was a pupil of the Master of the Rite. But since he died minutes before while opening the way to the nests, she found herself suddenly, alarmingly, inescapably in charge of the cleansing operation. Fun fact, the location of the nests is a children's restaurant now, the happiest place in town. Hell, Jane herself probably went there to celebrate a few birthdays. The next day, a lot of things had changed. For starters, Sarah was officially the new Master of the Rite. No question about it. No one even had to ask. There wasn't even a ceremony or anything. Just a whole lot of damage to fix, and her in the middle of all the spirit stuff. Grieving for her predecessor would have to wait. Another of the good folks we also lost that night was the sept leader of the era, Henry Banerender. They say he held the entire east side of the sept on his own, long enough for everybody else to mount an improvised defense. We'd have lost the sept without a sacrifice. In his honor, we refer to his final stand as the Rendering, where he showed the world why he deserved his deed name 100 times over. The rest of the night we refer to as the Night of the Bane Storm, for they say the sky was so full of the damn things you couldn't see a single star. The sept chose Dreadhorn as their new leader. She'd been warder up until then, so naturally she'd been the one who had mounted the defense that stood against the tide, so people were looking up to her for leadership. By all accounts, she did not want the position. I guess she didn't think people would really follow a Garou born? I don't know. Still, she ended up taking the job. There just wasn't anyone else as qualified or high-ranking. Enter McNichol, or Stormclaw, as per his deed name. He wasn't even from around these parts. No, the dude came from a Fianna Sept 15 hours drive south after he learned that a Garou-born had ascended to the position of sept leader. To him, and to the Fianna tribe in general, the Garou-born are aberrations, plain and simple. Insults to Gaia that should never be suffered to live. A sentiment I will never share, but one that's usually non-negotiable to the Fianna. He came in all smug and puffed up chest to challenge the Redhorn for the role. completely shameless. His challenge included words to the tune of correcting the mistake of letting the Garou-born live so long. Dreadhorn, unimpressed, agreed, stating that if she won, Stormclaw would have to accept her as sept leader and take the role of warden in her stead. A bold move for sure, but if she rose to the role of sept leader, that left the warder position empty, and after the recent events, the sept was acutely aware of its importance. The challenge was in 3 parts. The first part tested their honor and leadership skills, which Dreadhorn won. They then met in a clash of wisdom and strategic planning, which Stormclaw won. So it came down to glory and physical prowess. They weren't supposed to fight, exactly. The Master of Challenge didn't want to tempt the Fianna, so they were supposed to go through a series of obstacles, but they were too evenly matched to judge, and snarling at each other every step of the way, itching to duke it out. Before the very last obstacle, they came to blows. Hard. They say the battle lasted 4 straight hours. Stormclaw, an excellent warrior, kept the upper hand for most of the fight, but Dreadhorn just wouldn't go down. Getting back up and up and up, her will never wavering once. To this day, Stormclaw claims he'd have won if he hadn't promised not to kill her until after the challenge. Since he couldn't deal a killing blow, the combat kept going until finally the Fianna faltered, exhausted and unable to break the Garou-born. He, reluctantly, forfeited. Dreadhorn accepted his honorable surrender, and thus, as per the terms of the challenge, they each took their new positions. And so began a decade of mutual disdain. But, for all of their differences, they both still love Gaia and the Sept of the Shadows by Firelight dearly. And despite their dysfunction, the Sept somehow prospered. Which takes us to our meeting. Present were ourselves, as we'd been designated responsible for Jane, the Sept leader, of course, and the Council of Elders, a hodgepodge of the Sept's most influential Garou. In theory, as the name indicates, it should consist of all of the Sept's elders, but on most Sept, they're lucky if they have more than a couple, if any at all, what with most Garou dying young in a blaze of glory. Most have to do with what they got, which usually means the Garou of the highest ranks and those with important Sept positions. Before the recess, the 2 loudest voices had been the Sept's wormfoe, Thunderdrop. That's the person in charge of planning offense, such as sending scouts and raids, and of course, Stormclaw, the warder. With Black Spiral Dancers dealing trouble so close to the Sept, it was both a matter of defense and offense after all. The wormfoe wanted information he could use to strike quickly and swiftly. He'd sent feelers into the city, but really wanted Jane back in school too. She was already a student. It was a no-brainer, he said. But Stormclaw, he wanted none of that. He'd argued that it was a horrible plan to send a newly shifted werewolf with no idea what she was, how dangerous she was, amongst children, in one of the most horrible places on Earth, a goddamned high school. And honestly, as much as I don't like the guy, he had a point. Furthermore, he argued, we could find a way to infiltrate a kinfolk, or even one of us as a custodial. Now that the recess was over, we would hear Dreadhorn's decision. And as usual, she did not side with Stormclaw. He was used to it, but this time children were involved. Things got real heated, real fast. Terrible things were said that I do not care to repeat. The core of it was that since the Garou-born are infertile, Dreadhorn couldn't understand and wasn't qualified to make that call or some such drivel. I swear they would have killed each other right then and there if Sarah hadn't intervened. She used some sort of spirit power to calm down everyone, then stared down Gloria until she relented as well. Lest you forget, she's Garou-born too, and more than a few insults she'd felt as strongly as if they'd been slung her way. All in all, it was just the worst first impression we could ever have given Jane. Still, she'd gotten what she wanted. She'd go back to school, see her friends again, get a chance to say goodbye to her old life. But she wasn't too happy about the circumstances, and she wasn't too fond about the company she'd be holding from now on. When things died out, she was directly addressed by the sept leader, asking her, "Young lady, you're very new at this. Not even a client yet. But circumstances force our hand. We ask much of you. Can you do this?" She physically tensed, seemed ready to implode or scream. It sounded like all she wanted to say was, "Better than staying here!" But instead, she took a deep breath, looked Dreadhorn dead in the eye, and just said, "Yes." She waited a second, then added, with all the genuine sincerity in the world, "Cool horns." Just like that, she declared her side. She didn't understand all the nuances, but she knew hate and prejudice when she saw it. "Ah, stop growling. This is a pro-Garou born story. Deal with it." She knew hate and prejudice when she saw it, and she had a youth's drive to change the world. Sure, she could have just told Stormclaw to keel over and die, choking on his own bitterness, but that would have resulted in many dead people, so this was the next best thing. Dreadhorn was speechless for a minute. Her horns had always been a source of ridicule, shame, or worse. Right up until she'd gotten important enough that most idiots just didn't dare mock them anymore, and most kinder folks just felt it best left unmentioned. Odds are they had rarely, if ever, been the source of an actual compliment. And really, that was a damn shame because they really were killer horns. I swear the sept leader might have just blushed had she been in Hamid instead of her natural form. "Why, thank you." Just like that. Not even 24 hours into this, Jane had made a friend and an enemy. Ah, Garou politics wastes no time. Anywho, we left the meeting and kind of just gathered our thoughts for a bit. How we'd approach the whole thing. The day was getting late too, and we had to get Jane home to her mom. She'd be worried, sick by now. So we made up a story about how she'd hidden from the nut job that had murdered all those folks last night. She'd have had to listen to the dead and dying. Hopefully, that would discourage any further questioning, at least at first. She was quite pensive as I was walking her home. For the first time that day, she wasn't assaulted by a barrage of new knowledge and weird conversations. She needed that silence to process all that she'd learned. After a long, long while, she blurted out, It's a lot, you know? Your world of monsters and cosmic wars and ends of the world. Yeah, it is. You got it harder than most, I said. You're getting this crash course which isn't even done yet, and you're thrown right back to the wolves. I hear the classwalkers try to do this all the time, but most folks, they get about a year as a cub, learning under someone, and then they get their trial by fire in the rite of passage. This is so wrong, but it's also necessary. Like so many things are. This is what you do, isn't it? You talk. What? Oh, my auspice. It's a little reductive, but yeah. I'm a Galliard. We're the storytellers, the gibbous moons. Cursed and blessed, with a great memory, so we rarely forget the tales. Even those we'd rather leave behind. It was my turn to be pensive now, my eyes trailing off in the distant past. She brought me back. Why? What's the point of carrying all that pain? Damn, I had started this all wrong. Let me start over. It's not the pain, it's the lessons. My duty is to know the stories of those who came before, so we are inspired by their glory, guided by their honor, and tempered by their wisdom. Our ancestors have accomplished a great many deeds whose example are worth following. but they have also failed in many ways, and that too we must remember, so that we may do better. She hesitated, at odds with what she'd heard and what she'd seen. It doesn't seem to be working too well, based on how some of you have been treating the Garou born and the kinfolk. I met a girl this morning, and it seems some of them aren't enjoying a whole lot of freedom. You're very behind in the marriage department. That hurt, but she was right. You can remember all details and teach all you want, I explained. But if the people aren't ready to hear, you're not going anywhere. Still, we're better off than we were. The younger generations are slowly bringing some change in perspective. Better days are coming, just very slowly. In any case, lest you believe us useless, I assure you young and old are always ready to hear tales of hallowed heroes, keeping the troops riled up and ready to fight. Like cheerleaders, she said, deadpan. Like cheerleaders, I agreed. But it's so much more than that. Let's say we're about to face a black spiral dancer hive located where a cairn used to be. Knowing the history of the place might yield important knowledge. And there's always the odd bane or weird supernatural threat that no one knows how to tackle. You bet something similar happened before, and knowing how it was handled then always comes in handy now. So we tell stories, so many stories, around the campfires, all across the nation. The saga of the Silver Crown, the birth of the perfect Metis, the terror of the Baba Yaga, the purging of the Cyberdogs, the night of the Thousand Bane Storm. Those sound fascinating, she said. Good, because I will recount them all to you in due time. Once a month, we gather together at the sept for the mood rite. It's an elaborate party with many phases, one of which is the stories and song. Easily my favorite part of every month. The best of the best gather to regale crowds. We sing, we drink, we recount the legends. It's one of our most important duties. It's here, too, that we boast of the sept's latest achievements and spread the word of everyone's heroic deeds. The spirits see much, but they also rely on us. If our stories impress them enough, they may decide someone is ready to rise in ranks. Wait, she countered. Your job is to glorify everyone before the spirits? What was all that this morning about it being safe and balanced? My job is to glorify, but the Ragabash's job is to bring down, and the Philodox must stand somewhere in the middle, balancing the whole thing. Every time a Ragabash tricks someone and shows their flaws, the spirits see this too. Every time a Philodox renders a fair judgment, good or bad, the spirits see this too. They are everywhere. They see every side of the coin, including the things that happen when no one's around to see. No one but them. We trust them in this. She didn't seem convinced. Cubs rarely are, but she gave me a glance that meant she'd think about it. So this is my life now, she said. Answering the beck and call of people like Stormclaw? No, I replied. Now, you get to howl your woes away. I allowed a dramatic pause, received an inquisitive glare, then pursued. I know what it is to grow up different, like you don't belong anywhere. But that's all behind you. From now on, even when you stand alone, frightened before a mighty foe, when you falter, bloodied and beaten, when your enemies draw near, when your fears surround you, or just when your tears threaten to overwhelm your senses, howl your woes away. Drop to all fours, lift your head and sing. Your pain, your dread, shout it all into the night. You will be heard. You will be heard. You might strike fear into the hearts of the fallen, or freeze the blood right in the veins of men. You might stop the tide of evil long enough to catch your breath, and then you'll hear the most wonderful sound. You will hear us. the Garou, answering the call, by your side, against any and all odds. And together, we will be heard, for none can ignore the Garou's challenge. That was a far better selling speech than anything I've heard so far, she answered. Thank you, I replied, beaming. Did you kind of burst into song for a second? Who the hell does that? This has been A Rite to Remember, Season 1, Episode 9. A series of lore videos for Werewolf the Apocalypse as it was prior to the upcoming 5th edition, presented through an ongoing narrative for an immersive perspective. The Galliard are a fantastic auspice, but they can be somewhat difficult to play. The core of the Galliard concept is to rile up the troops, boost morale, and inspire. They are there to make everyone feel awesome, like they can take on anything. By that very premise, they are required to take center stage and let their voices ring with words of wisdom. They must know the stories of old and the lessons we can learn from them. Even for an experienced player with plenty of stories to tell, it can be a challenge. After all, a story from one chronicle won't necessarily translate well to another. In such circumstances, it's often best to work with your storyteller. You can draw up a story in advance, or failing that, remember that the onus isn't entirely on you. It's okay to pause the game, roll a relevant dice pool to see if you've heard of something that might help, and let the storyteller give you something to work with. A very good source of inspiration to those can be the books themselves. A lot of werewolf books start with a fiction, usually told from an in-game perspective. They aren't all going to be relevant, but they can be a good starting point. And, it's a big world. A story taken from a fable or even a personal tale can work just as well. A Galliard's repertoire isn't limited to werewolf history anyway, as long as it gets the point across. A good place to shine, however, is in making your own pack look good. Freaking amazing, even. During the mood Rite, especially in LARP, you can take a moment to recount their adventures and crank up the epic, or play up the humor, whatever makes the story stand out best. Now, if you're not an orator, that's okay too. You're allowed to have fun. This is role-playing, especially in tabletop. You can just let the dice talk. Just like you're not really punching up a thunderworm, you don't have to really sing or really count the tale. As should be clear by now, the Galliards are part of a whole system designed to keep the Garou on the right track. It's not just a Philodox showing the path ahead. In their own ways, the Philodox, Ragabash, and Galliard are all there to help the Garou overcome their significant flaws. Because, as should be crystal clear by now, the Garou may be heroes, but they are very flawed. Just because they're the protagonist doesn't mean they are right. The War of Rage, when the Garou attacked the other shapeshifters, was a huge mistake. One that changed the world of darkness forever and gave the worm a significant advantage. One of the core tenets of Werewolf the Apocalypse, one that is poorly explained in the books, is the questioning of the way. It's not just a Ragabash concept, it permeates the setting. In the first edition, it was represented as the young cubs challenging the elders because the war is nearly lost, and the old ways clearly aren't getting them anywhere. Letting rage rule cost the nation so much. The Garou need to do better. It's time to try something else. A whole lot of the word count is spent showing players, not characters, players, that killing the monsters isn't enough. It's just the start. If you stop there, it's just delaying the inevitable. They'll just reform in the Umbra and come back. You need to nurture. You need to cleanse. You need to actually fix the problem. Or else it was all for naught. Heck, you might even make it worse. This is a lesson the Garou still haven't learned. So it's a good thing the Galliards are all about teaching lessons. Have fun changing the world for the better. You got this.